The Welfare of Anaesthetists Special Interest Group started with an informal meeting at a restaurant called Onions in 1994. The health of doctors was a poorly addressed issue then, and much has changed over the last 20 years. Two of the founding members, Dr. Khursandi and the immediate past president of the college, Dr. Genevieve Goulding, spoke to me about the history of this important group at the annual scientific meeting in Auckland in 2016.
There was a meeting called Risks to the Anaesthetist held in Melbourne, and that evening we got together with about a dozen people and had a dinner at a restaurant called Onions. So at the beginning the group was called Onions, and we sort of took it from there.
We thought Onions was quite appropriate afterwards, because we thought onions had many layers and onions could make you cry. So
but they also had roots, and they could grow.
Yes.
So
we thought it was quite appropriate. And for a while we called the group the Onions Group.
We did. But when we got going a bit more than that and decided we wanted to do make some active steps to improve the health and welfare and well-being of anaesthetists, we needed a secretariat, and the college very kindly agreed to do that, and we were one of the first special interest groups to form.
So Genevieve, we work in a stressful environment, and that has always been the case for anaesthetists. Why do you think it's taken so long for us to address this very important issue?
I think mostly it's stigma, but I think also it was just expected. Traditionally it's been a male-oriented profession, and I think it's always been that, you just have to man up and it's all part of the job, and that it makes you strong, and it's all part of training. And we still hear people say, well, in my day I did 160-hour week and it was nothing, sort of thing, and I mean that attitude still prevails. So that's partly it, and that we never received any instruction or training about personal health and personal well-being and the importance of personal health and the interaction between your emotional state and your effectiveness of your work. I don't think that was well understood at all.
The good thing that's happened over the years is at the beginning I think people looked upon us as a couple of crazy old women. As I said, we weren't actually that old even. And I can remember a colleague saying to me a few years ago, I thought all this touchy-feely stuff was just nonsense. He said, I thought if you couldn't stand the heat, you should get out of the kitchen. And then he said, but now I realise you were right, so we do have to address these things as very important issues to address. And I think the attitude of quite a lot of people has changed because of our group's work. And the stigma is still, it's still there. It's less than it was, but 25 years ago there was a lot of stigma. And Are You OK Day, that sort of initiative I think has really helped, because often people, not that they didn't know what was going on, but they were too frightened to intervene perhaps, or didn't have the right words, didn't have the courage to try and look after the colleagues.
Genevieve, there's been a big shift in gender in the specialty during our time as specialists. Do you think that this is something women bring to the profession, a greater awareness of mental health issues?
I think I think women are more in touch with their emotions. I think that's one thing.
There are other things about more women trainees and more women fellows, apart from a sort of critical mass. There are also the issues of part-time work, which was identified a long time ago as attitudes to that are quite negative. And that hopefully is changing, but still I think the attitudes are out there. And so the people who want to work part-time, whether it be women with childcare responsibilities or guys who want to work part-time, we're very much supportive of them being able to choose what they want, how they want to work, and also supportive of the return to work programs that we offer those people, and perhaps also some people who are returning to work after impairment.
So we've supported flexible training for a long time, and there's certainly a number of other specialties where trainees are afraid to even tell their department head that they're pregnant. Or they conceal it because they feel that they'll be dropped off their training program and they certainly won't be supported, or that they may have trouble getting back on. But so I think that certainly helped. But I think I prefer to talk more about generational issues, because what I'm seeing now is we've got 46% of our trainees are female, but we have a number of men, probably the same number of men who are wanting to work, I won't say reduced hours, just sensible hours. You know, they don't want to work 8-day weeks and you know, work till midnight, and because they do well. They may have for a start, they may have a partner who's got their own profession, their own jobs or careers, but they've also got children, and they want to spend time with their children. They don't want to be like the role models from our generation.
And a couple of other things to mention too, Chris. Coming from the rural background, I think the rural practitioners in all disciplines find it harder because it's more isolating. There are less mentors, there's less resources, and you sort of have to carry on regardless in a lot of cases. So that's been another interest of mine, and also I've been involved with the Doctors' Health Advisory Service in Queensland, and it's very exciting that the Medical Board is now supporting transition in all states of those advisory services to programs similar to the Victorian Doctors' Health Program. So hopefully impaired doctors will get more support and more help in returning to health than they did in the past.
Genevieve, anaesthetists have always been a vulnerable group of individuals, and there's been records of suicide right back to the beginning of the history of our specialty. Why do you think it's taken so long for us to address this really important issue?
We don't have any good data, so it's all anecdotal. We still don't have good data. So what we do know about suicide and anaesthetists in this country is purely by informal data collection, which is anecdotal. It's not. We have actually made an effort through the National Coronial Information System, which is a national database across Australia and New Zealand, to try and get some harder data, and in fact their data was worse than ours because so you know, that it wasn't often documented whether it was a suicide or not, for example, or a drug overdose, and it wasn't always clear whether the person was a doctor or not. So it's been very difficult, and of course the regulatory bodies aren't willing to share any information either. So it's been quite difficult to get done. So I think that's part of the problem. And often suicides haven't been acknowledged as suicides. You know, they've been accidental deaths or whatever, and that's partly the stigma, which may be a societal stigma, or maybe you know, against someone's religion, for example, to acknowledge that it's suicide. It might be because of insurance and payouts and that sort of thing.
So the college has an award, the Ray Hayder Award, which does exactly that. Do you think that this very public acknowledgement of the problem is important, and that these sort of awards publicise the issue?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I think that the lives of those that have been so tragically cut short also need to be celebrated for the contributions that they made. And if we highlight those people who help others, which is what the Ray Hayder Award is about, I think we add value to the fact that we're human beings and we need to support each other as human beings as well as being professional colleagues.
And importantly, that Ray Hayder Award is an award of compassion.
Yes.
And it's such a critical value, not just to, you know, it's real to being a doctor. So I think it's a really, really important. Having said that, it's quite difficult sometimes to find. There are many people that we feel deserve it, but they're just quiet achievers who beaver away doing wonderful things.
Don't put themselves forward.
They don't put themselves forward, and so that's been the hard part.
Do you think we can address the welfare of anaesthetist issues through the examination process and, importantly, through the CME process?
I think one of the things that really helped in our campaign to highlight the issues of doctors' health was when a question was first included in the final exam. And we are very grateful that that happened, because I think there's nothing that bends a trainee's mind further to study of a certain subject than if it's going to be included in the exam. So I think that really helped the impetus of spreading the word. And I would hope that that would continue. And certainly at the Part 0 and Part 3 courses, doctors' health issues are always highlighted.
So, I'll add to that certainly with having the welfare questions in the exam was a huge help.
Yes.
But then also we revised our curriculum, and so now we have the ANSCA roles in practice, and so the professional role is embedded in there. And so that's another way of making sure that people understand that that's as important a role as, and all the things that go with that, as important a role as being an expert or technical expert in your role. With respect to CME, I think that the way to do it is, I mean, we could be brave and try and include it as a voluntary activity and not a mandatory activity, but I think the thing to do is to go through the medical board. And, you know, the medical board and medical council in New Zealand have certainly got doctors' health issues embedded in their code of conduct, you know, that you should have a GP, that you need to, you know, that self-care is really important, that you shouldn't self-prescribe and so on. And these are pretty well mandated in their codes of conduct. So I think if we could remind them of that and say, well, look, you know, if this is an important part of professional development is, can this individual demonstrate to the community, and that is what we're doing in effect by our CPD, soon to be revalidation, probably, you know, is this doctor actually as fit to practice? And that includes their mental and physical health and their mental and physical well-being. So I've just attended the New Fellows Conference and had a fascinating talk by a psychiatrist there who showed quite clearly that, you know, one of the ways of reducing stress is to learn techniques such as mindfulness, which have been well shown to, you know, to make stress management in any stressful situation, in personal life as well as your working life, and that it will impact on your professional relationships and your patient care. So I think if we can, you know, make this more mainstream and get the medical regulators on side, I think they will. I think the thing to do is to get them to agree that it's an important part of revalidation or recertification, and that we could then put it into the program. But there's no reason why we couldn't start first, and that's certainly, in fact, one of the new fellows has suggested it. We've talked to the CPD chair about it. This only happened a few days ago, and so we'll certainly discuss it. But I think it'll take a little while to appear, but it's a good idea.
What do you see as the major barriers to overcoming some of the serious mental health issues in our profession, such as drug addiction, alcohol addiction, suicide? These are still major hurdles as I see it.
I think that it's really important. Well, I think that attitudes have to change. You know, I still think there's significant stigma about mental health issues or illness, really. And some illness seems to be more acceptable than others. So I think that we really have to work on destigmatizing. And that was one of the things that from the very beginning we had. This was one of our goals was to destigmatize, and I think we've gone part of the way, but we haven't got anywhere nearly as far as we should. So it needs to be, you know, if you've been off work because you have depression, it should be just as valid as if you've had a myocardial infarct or broke your leg on the ski slopes. It shouldn't be any different, you know.
And I think the other thing too that we sometimes tend to forget is that depression is a very common illness.
Yes.
And that I think the lifetime incidence is very high, and therefore anaesthetists, being human beings, are going to be getting depressed. So there's going to be a very small core number of suicides from that illness that we won't be able to prevent despite all treatment, despite all attempts. The IV drug abuse is a different issue, and again a very thorny issue, and perhaps we will never prevent either a hardcore of addicts. But we do need to be able to identify them and to offer them rehabilitation as soon as we can.
Having said that, the most common substance abusing drug in doctors is alcohol.
Yes.
You know, I mean, isn't it quite clearly? And you know, we know that there are doctors, certainly in my hospital, who've lost their license because, you know, they've been drunk driving, and they've lost their license and catching taxis to work, or their partner's driving them, whatever. So, you know, that seems to be tolerated. It somehow seems to.
It's a more socially
acceptable substance to abuse, but it's really no different. You know, it's an addictive behaviour, and it needs to be treated and needs to be controlled, and it's a lifelong problem.
With alcohol, it's a slow burn in that you don't get problems perhaps until several years down the track as far as patient safety goes. Whereas with some of the anaesthetic drugs, addiction to some of the anaesthetic drugs, it's a very quick progress to addiction and often a very quick progress to death. With the opiates, the old opiates, it's a slower progress, but it's still faster than alcohol.
Propofol is a different beast altogether, and I think we don't know as much about propofol addiction as we probably should. And one of our roles has been to interact with the medical regulators. I don't think that not only is propofol abuse not very well understood, it's not treated consistently around our two countries.
So having this important group, the Welfare of Anaesthetists Special Interest Group, brings a lot of things out into the open that haven't been in the past. Do you think this is then an opportunity for us to be doing some research into these previously hidden issues?
Yes, well, that's an interesting thought too, because at the moment we're running with the very generous help of the college as a secretariat. But currently we have no funds for research or project officers or anything like that. So I'd like to think that we might get there in the next few years. So that's a dream I think that we've all had, which would be lovely to realise. I think that there's lots of work to be done out there, that we could do more research if we had more time and some funds. So that would be nice to think that would happen.
The other thing is the confidentiality and the privacy laws, and I'm hoping that when we get a national doctors' health program running, we might be able to get a little bit more data and have the opportunity to do some research. But at the moment, it's very difficult.
So the Special Interest Group has evolved over time. How do you see its role now, and what do you think its role will be in the future?
It has evolved over time, but I think we have been always really looking at education and at promoting the cause of doctors' health. And I think we've progressively done that in all sorts of ways. We've talked about it, we've given presentations, we've had workshops, we've got resource documents, we've had support from all three bodies, the college, the ASA and the NZSA. We've
put it into the curriculum.
We've put it into the curriculum, exactly. And I think we're just basically continuing to spread the word. We don't obviously undertake any treatment of any sort because we can't take on a duty of care to anyone, but we do on occasion give advice. If someone comes to us with a knotty problem, we can advise them on what course of action they should take. And we've mentioned research, so it would be nice to be able to get some more research and some more data so we can put better handles on the issues that we're dealing with. So I think it's possible we might be able to develop a model of care as well for the departments and for private groups. So those are some of the things we're doing.
What about our examination process? Everyone knows that our examinations are very stressful. Does the welfare group have a role to play in supporting the trainees through this very stressful time?
One of the things that we did in the revised curriculum, which we rolled out in 2013, was that we developed a quite extensive trainee experiencing difficulty process. So all our supervisors, well certainly our education officers, so there's one for each of the states and for New Zealand, but also our supervisors of training, at least have some structure around if they do come across a trainee who's not progressing for whatever reason, and it may just be exam difficulty, it could be more other personal issues, or just the rate at which they're developing, gives them sort of some structure around what to do. So there are some, the supervisor of training does give some guidance around what to do if you have a trainee experiencing difficulty with exams. So we've now introduced mandated feedback so if trainees fail exams more than once, they actually get an interview with an examiner. So they don't just get a letter from the college saying, sorry, you failed. Okay. You do get some targeted feedback. But we're also looking at some other strategies. So some people use sports psychologists or performance psychologists or those types of resources, and just give some generic advice around. Those people are very useful because they they are able to help trainees understand that, you know, you need a, while you've got clear goals, which is passing the exam, you've still got to have everything else in balance. You know, you've still got to eat properly and sleep properly, and you've got to have, you know, study at the most effective time and structure your study and so on.